Good morning.
Good morning.
It's so nice to see you all here this morning. The late educator and Christian theologian from the Harvard Divinity School, Peter Gomes, once said, "When I saw the Christmas lights being strung up across the city streets and the Santa Clauses in the store windows at Sears, I knew that Thanksgiving could not be far away." It is kind of a funny quote if you think about it, but it seems that our consumer society really has yet to figure out Thanksgiving. We seem to jump right from the back-to-school sales to Halloween to Christmas with barely a glancing nod to Thanksgiving. And I think that's because it can be difficult to package gratitude for profit. But the retailers are certainly working on it. I mean, I think Walmart opened their doors at 8 o'clock on Thanksgiving night. Target was open at 9. And a lot of the big box stores and the malls opened at midnight that same night just to get a jump on that holiday spirit. But how do we, as a Christian community, remain focused on the real meaning of gratitude and what it means to give thanks? And how do we keep from becoming caught up in the pessimism of our world when we see so much difficulty around us? How do we give thanks in all the difficulties? My friends, would you please pray with me? Holy One, we are a community of your people, created in your image and part of the creation that you call very good. We sometimes stumble and fall, and we sometimes are joy-filled and loving. Remind us that to offer gratitude through our joys and even through the difficulties can open each of us to a life of wholeness and of joy. Help us, God, to be aware that our words of gratitude and of thanks can change lives, especially our own lives. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, and may they bring comfort and healing to our world. Amen. So I want to start this morning by looking at the reading from Luke's Gospel, which Rick just read for us, which begins with Jesus going into Jerusalem. Now I want to give you a little something to remember, so pay attention to this. Jesus is going into Jerusalem. Whenever you hear a reading from one of the Gospels that begins this way, remember that some of the most important things in the life of Jesus happened when he was traveling somewhere. It seems whenever Jesus is traveling, he always runs into people who need his help. And of course, Jesus, being Jesus, always stops and he honors and he recognizes the sacred value of that person, or in this case, that group of people. They are in the end healed and redeemed. And so as this story begins with the phrase "on the way to Jerusalem," it should signal to us that the story will have a redemptive message to us. Just a little hint or a little heads up for you. So in this instance, as Jesus is traveling into Jerusalem, he is met by a colony of lepers who, while keeping their distance, cry out to Jesus, "Master, have mercy on us." And then Jesus did something that was probably somewhat unfamiliar to this group of lepers. He saw them. He actually saw them. He noticed them, and he didn't ignore them. Now, lepers during that time, of course, were considered the unclean. They had no place in society and had been, by the contraction of their leprosy, shunned from society. But Jesus saw them. He recognized their humanity, and he told them to go and present themselves to the priests. There they could be declared clean and again fit for society. So the lepers did exactly what Jesus told them to do. They left, and while they were on their way to see the priests, they were healed. And the story goes on to tell us that one leper, when he saw that he was healed of this disease, before he had even been declared clean by the priests, he turned around and he fell at Jesus' feet and he thanked him. You know, I can almost picture this one person, this person who has suffered from leprosy, this person who has been shunned from society and probably hasn't seen their family and friends and loved ones for a very long time. Before he even went to the priest to be declared clean and again fit for society, he stopped and he went back to thank Jesus for his healing. Now Jesus asked, where are the others? The other 9. What happened to them? Where are they? But then Jesus' focus goes back to this one. The one who stopped and returned to give thanks. And Jesus tells him, get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. This expression, your faith has made you well. If you think about it, it seems as if it may refer to a blessing other than the healing, because the healing had already occurred. Your faith has made you well. Now, the Greek translation for this is, your faith has saved you, or your faith has made you whole. For this leper, this person on the margins of society has been made whole by turning around, by going back to Jesus and by thanking him, by offering thanksgiving, by offering gratitude. He has been made whole. And I have to wonder if that's why we feel so good and why we're filled with such peace when we stop and when we say thank you and when we really mean thank you. Not just a quick, hey, thanks for holding the door for me, or thanks for not hitting me while I'm driving on 95, or thanks for the really wonderful Christmas presents, but a heartfelt, deep with meaning, thank you. Thank you for listening to me when I'm having some difficulty. And thank you for serving on one of the church's much-needed committees. And thank you for your love and your support and your friendship throughout the past year. Thank you. These types of thank yous, these opportunities for sharing of gratitude, they can save us and they can make us whole. But let's face it, in our world today, it seems harder and harder to sometimes stop and to give a meaningful thank you. Our lives can be so busy, it can be difficult to find opportunities to show and to share our gratitude, especially if the world seems to be falling down around us. And as the official holiday season approaches, it can sometimes seem as if there are expectations that we will always be happy and that we will always be filled with joy and peace and filled with the holiday spirit. But that isn't always the case. This time of the year can be the most difficult time to actually feel that sense of gratitude. The holidays can present to us a time when our losses and our difficulties are magnified and seemingly insurmountable. How do I give gratitude when I feel lost, or when I'm alone, or when I'm hurting? In Paul's letter to the church at Thessalonica, the reading that we also just heard, Paul writes that they and we are to rejoice always, to pray without ceasing, to give thanks in all circumstances. Yeah. That sounds a little tough. Give thanks in all circumstances? How do I do that? I don't know if I can do that. That's a lot to ask. And as I was thinking about that reading and this message, as I was writing this message, it occurred to me that this coming Saturday, December 1st, is World AIDS Day. And I began thinking of dear friends who are no longer with us and how I miss them. And I wondered how I could give thanks for this. Like many of you, I'm sure, I wondered, how could I give thanks for this? How can I give thanks for the AIDS crisis? And then I remembered what Paul wrote. He did not write, give thanks for all circumstances, but give thanks in all circumstances. These ideas or concepts have two very different meanings. And as I reflected on this a little longer, I remembered how at the height of the AIDS crisis, how so many people stood up and spoke out for those people who had no voice. How many of you remember, act out, act up, fight AIDS? And I remember how MCC stepped to the forefront of the battle and offered pastoral care and comfort and visitations and healings and funerals when no one else would. When it seemed that so many churches and even our own government turned its back on this very vulnerable group of people, MCC said, we are here. MCC said, God is bigger than AIDS, and that all people, every person, has sacred value. And I remember and honor the women of MCC and how they kept this denomination moving forward and how they stood by their brothers and how we were really all in this together. Give thanks in all circumstances, not for all circumstances, but in all circumstances. There can be a reason, an opportunity for gratitude if we are open to it. We must be willing to get beyond the difficulties and open our eyes to it, and that's not an easy journey. A favorite writer of mine, Tony Campolo, who is a sociologist and an evangelical Baptist pastor, shares a story of when he had an opportunity to meet with members of the Jewish community who were survivors of Auschwitz. Tony had a radio show in Philadelphia, and he was discussing his viewing of the movie Schindler's List. And after the radio program, he received a phone call from a man who identified himself as a survivor of the German concentration camps. He told Tony that there was a small group of survivors living in Philadelphia, and he invited Tony to their next gathering to interview others who had also survived these atrocities. So Tony went, and he shares that there were about 20 men and women who attended this breakfast, and all of them were willing to share their experiences. Tony asked one of the men if he cringed every time he heard someone with a German accent, and if his experiences had made him into someone who hated the German people. And this man answered no. He said that he bore no hostility to the Germans. He told Tony, "I was just a boy when they loaded my father and me onto a train and shipped us off to the prison camp. We were in a boxcar squeezed together so that we could hardly breathe. It was more than 3 days that we traveled on that train. It would stop and sometimes sit for hours, and we had no food and no water. The smell of the boxcar was overpowering, and I remember crying because my stomach hurt from lack of food. But twice during the night at stops along the way to Auschwitz, people sneaked out of the surrounding woods, came up to the boxcar at the risk of their own lives, and slipped pieces of bread and cups of water through the boxcar slats. My gratitude for those kindnesses is still overwhelming, and every time I hear someone with a German accent, I think to myself, this could be the child or the grandchild of one of those persons who reached out to me in my hour of need." My friends, it is not give thanks for all circumstances, but give thanks in all circumstances. Changing our attitude, changing the way that we act and the way that we react, and changing our thoughts can change our lives for the better. The writer Sarah Miles tells us, our lives are not about avoiding pain at all costs, but going through it together and finding gratitude in the experience. And Meister Eckhart, one of my favorites, shares, if the only prayer that you say in your whole life is thank you, that would suffice. For churches that follow the common lectionary, today is Reign of Christ Sunday, which is the last Sunday of the liturgical year, kind of a church's New Year's Eve. So as we finish out this liturgical year, and as we begin Advent in the season of hope and of new beginning, and as we begin our preparations for the Christmas holiday season, I want to ask each of you to be the person who creates for themselves a new beginning by saying to God, "You created me to be a loving, caring person, perfect, whole, and complete. Thank you. My life is so rich and so wonderful. Thank you. In all the circumstances of my life, even in the difficulties, God, thank you." Offer up a new gratitude, a thanksgiving to our Creator for all that is in the joys and even in the difficulties. And take some time during the difficulties, the times of struggle and of pain, to look for the small blessings that are there. Sometimes you just have to really look for them, but they are there. Now, being grateful and showing gratitude takes practice. It doesn't just happen by flipping a switch, but make it a habit to acknowledge your gratitude at least once a day. Create a gratitude journal or just simply sit down and write some long overdue thank you notes. And remember through all of this, just as Jesus said to that one person, the one leper, the one who returned, your faith has made you well. Your faith can and will make you whole and complete. And my friends, know that in all circumstances you can have a life of joy and of gratitude. You know, the leprosies and the difficulties in our lives will always be with us. But if we don't let them own us, then we are healed and we are made whole, completely whole. Amen.
Amen.